Hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Janai and this is Karmic Fixer Tarot. And it's been a while since I've done a reading. I've started a tarot deck study with my Jungian deck and there's videos. So far there's 3 videos on that if that's something you're interested in. Just kind of a overview of how I study a tarot deck and how I get to know its energy. And I think I did a response video to another online tarot reader who does tarot reading with Uno cards, and there's that too. It's on the channel. So, but it's been a little bit since I've done just a reading, and I think one thing that's on my mind lately is the upcoming Mercury retrograde, which is a really fascinating time for me because I was born in 1980 in under the sun sign Cancer, and my Mercury sign, which is also Cancer, was in retrograde. And so I've been kind of obsessed with what Mercury energy is and how that manifests in a retrograde season. And our next upcoming one, let's see, if my resources are correct, is June 29th. So we're not that far away from one, getting to the height of Cancer season. So I was a little concerned about that. There were a few things that I actually wanted to launch this summer. I was actually looking into being more of or having tarot reading, actual reading for other people as kind of a side hustle or whatnot. I've done that from time to time, group settings, things like that. But I've never done that as a side hustle. And of course, I read online under different topics and different queries. But I had been interested in just kind of branching out as a tarot reader, finding places to read and that sort of thing. And this was kind of the season I was going to do it, just kind of like a summer sort of thing. But in light of Mercury retrograde, there was part of me that's a little wary about that. Would now be a good time to launch as an in-person tarot reader? And so I was curious about that. So I figured I would consult the Oracle. I'd consult some tarot cards. Today, I actually want to use one of my new favorite decks, the Rosebud Tarot, and get some insight into how I should navigate the energy of Mercury retrograde. Of course, as I'm learning more and more about astrology and how certain placements, certain aspects, and certain transits affect me and how they affect people in general. I was curious about how Mercury in retrograde affects someone like me, who was born when Mercury was in retrograde, and how that affects things like communication, technology. And from what I understand, of course, this is a time to be really careful about how we speak, how we use our communication. Also a time where there can be delays in things like travel. There can be kind of issues in our technology, particularly in using technology for communication. So that was an energy that I'm looking for some insight on how to navigate. So I figure I'd start with my cards. And yeah, so here we go. We're using the Rosebud Tarot. I'm consulting the Oracle. So Oracle, how would you suggest that the collective and I, anybody watching this video, what is some advice that you can give us on navigating this energy of the upcoming retrograde? How we can move forward with projects, how we can speak with clarity, and how we can stave off some of the challenges that a retrograde brings, and how we can tap into maybe some of the opportunities that a retrograde brings. So again, my question to the Oracle: how would you suggest or give us some insight on how to navigate Mercury in retrograde? So I'm just doing a little more shuffling. Let me reposition my computer because I'll pan down in a little bit. And I think I'm going to use the 3-card spread that I like to use. A simple 3-card advice from universe spread that will give me some insight into how to navigate the energy. Retrograde should last from June 29th to July 23rd, just a little bit after my birthday. And so, yeah. So, a little more shuffling. I'm still kind of new to tarot and developing my system. And I tend to just sort of shuffle until everything feels shuffled enough. And I guess anybody who practices tarot or any other form of cartomancy, that tends to be how we shuffle, until we feel like we've... I have some jumpers, but I guess I'll set those aside. And the issue with my jumpers is that a lot of times, I don't know if I should attribute that to just kind of sloppy shuffling, but I also like to believe that there aren't really any mistakes when it comes to tarot. I like to take the cards as they come, and find significance in however the point gets across, whatever messages, whatever insights come through. So I think we've done enough shuffling here. So I'm going to pan down and cut the cards here. Just, oh. All right, so I'm going to draw 3 cards. The first card will be what to know, maybe some foundational information that will inform our query. Just some basic information to know what we need to know overall. Second card is a new perspective or a different perspective, maybe a different way to look at the situation that hasn't occurred to us before. And the third card is action steps, maybe something practical that we can do to get the best outcome, get the outcome we're seeking, or to be prepared for maybe any difficulties. Now, I had my 2 jumpers. We'll go ahead and take a look at those, and then we'll probably circle back around to actually interpreting them. So, generosity of air. And one of the things I really like about the Rosebud Tarot is that this particular card, generosity of air, is the card that represents, if I remember correctly, let's see. And this is one of the court cards, by the way. And that comes up as, let's see, let me think about this for a second. This, when I think about it, I think this is actually the equivalent of the Page of Air or the Page of Swords. So this is very interesting. So this looks like a pretty young princess, and the imagery that's used in this particular deck representing swords are shears. These appear to be maybe gardening shears or whatnot. And, this, to me anyway, at the very least, represents making a choice, represents cutting away at things that are unnecessary, being decisive, I think. So that's an interesting implement for the air cards, or the sword cards. And air, of course, represents mindset, represents strategy, intellect, communication. So when we have what's the equivalent of the Page of Swords, strategy is a really good thing to have. And I think in a period of any retrograde, particularly Mercury retrograde, this particular energy is very helpful. So we will want to make sure that we are mindful of how we speak, how we receive communication, um, be very strategic in how we communicate, be very mindful of the energy of the retrograde, be mindful that maybe things can be a little bit off kilter, and perhaps keep, bear that in mind as we're communicating with others, receiving communication, sharing communication, and maybe allow that to adjust our mindset a little bit. Perhaps allow us to be a little more generous, a little more introspective, a little more careful, and give people grace as needed. We have our little fox here, and what foxes represent. They represent cunning, craftiness, um, you know, being hard workers, or at the very least being industrious, or maybe more to the point, resourceful. Um, foxes can, foxes use their resources. They know how to navigate and maneuver. Interestingly enough, we actually have a fox in our neighborhood. I've seen him a few times. Generally, foxes are nocturnal, but I've seen a fox, probably the same fox, a couple times during the day. And unfortunately, our my cat, he and the fox had kind of a run in. My brother was able to rescue him and keep him from, you know, keep things from coming to a head. And so, our cat doesn't go out at night anymore until the fox situation is stabilized. But anyway, some hyper aware of foxes now that I've seen one. And when we think of what foxes represent, again, cunning, resourcefulness, this card is inviting us to take on that energy of being resourceful, but also, being mindful of the information that we're receiving, being a little more discerning, know what to accept and what to maybe do away with. I think that's represented by the shears here. So this is a generosity of air, and just the term generosity, perhaps a generosity of thinking, being a little more charitable with the assumptions that we make during this time. Mercury retrograde again, can represent a time of miscommunication, breakdowns in communication and how we share information, might be prevalent during this time. So let's employ an air of generosity in how we speak and in what we assume about the communications coming our way. So this was a really interesting card to have as a jumper. So I'm glad I held on to that. And normally I will just get one jumper, but we have two here. And we have a major arcana card. We have the moon, and the moon represents mystery, represents things that are not so clear, represent illusions and perhaps delusions as well. And this is a card that reminds us to, again, I think this reminds us to be discerning, to maybe not allow ourselves to be taken in by misinformation. And I think this goes well with this card. Perhaps this card represents the confusion itself that might come from a retrograde, and this will be our answer to dealing with that confusion. Um, things might not always be what they seem, or maybe be a little more careful to not necessarily take everything at face value, and be discerning in how we receive information, and be generous in how we receive information. So this actually seems like an action step here, and these came up as jumpers. So I thought that was very, very interesting. So we will hold on to the wisdom of these cards, and we'll move on to the next. Okay, and now on to our advice from the universe spread. Again, we have card one, which is our what we need to know, baseline information, foundational information, that maybe we already know about our query, or things to keep in mind. And a new perspective is card two, maybe something that didn't occur to us, but maybe some additional wisdom that will help us through this particular time, will help us an answer to our query. And third card is action step. So let's start with card one. Two of Earth. Now, Two of Earth, or in Standard Tarot, the Two of Pentacles, This is a card that is an invitation toward balance, being balanced in how we work. This card represents, as it's representing things to know, this is a time where we need to be more mindful of staying balanced. This is, while this can be a time where there might be some open, that might be open to confusion or, certain things can go wrong. This is also a time where we can be as balanced as we can. We can pay attention to the different details of our everyday life. Um, this is kind of coming out as maybe an action step as well. Take the steps necessary to keep things balanced. Maybe a little more due diligence. As Earth/Pentacles, they tend to represent our physical assets. The things that make up our physical world. That tends to be front of mind, finances, money, pentacles or whatnot. But in this card, I like how the representation is Earth. That can include money, finances, but it also can include our physical body. Making sure that we're maybe getting enough rest, being mindful of how to keep things balanced. Our physical health and our mental health, but also, you know, I like to think of pentacles as not just, resources in general, not just money and not just our physical health, but also our assets, maybe our skill sets, things that have been accumulated over the course of a period of time or even over the course of our lifetimes. So this is a good opportunity, a good reminder that this is a time where we need to do our due diligence to maintain balance, maintain, be more mindful of what it is that we have, how to make sure that we are standing in good stead against any sort of delays or hiccups or things that might throw things out of balance. So if we start from a nice balanced place, or before the retrograde hits, it might be a good idea to make sure things are at a good place to minimize any possibilities of confusion or miscommunication or glitches that might come during this period. So the Two of Earth, I think, is a good start. What to know. I think this card represents awareness of where things are balanced in our lives and perhaps where things need to be more balanced. Very specifically, with things related to Earth or Pentacles and other card decks, our physical health, our finances, our assets, our resources, things of that nature. So that's card number one. Let's see, card number two, new perspective, Ace of Earth. Now, this kind of speaks to maybe some anxiety that I was having about maybe starting something new during this time. But I think this card represents that maybe now is a good time to start. Just because a retrograde is taking place, just because we're aware of the things that can go wrong or be delayed or some of the challenges that come through, doesn't mean that this isn't a good time to start things. We just kind of, I guess, bearing in mind, have to be more mindful of how we proceed, make sure things are in a nice balance. I think as this is going up, hopefully this will go up before June the 29th, the start of the, the retrograde cycle. Now is a good time to maybe start shoring some things up. Maybe, push my, push things ahead before the retrograde period. Maybe now is a good time to, I don't know, maybe set up my Etsy tarot shop. I've been thinking about being an Etsy tarot reader. Maybe do like a summer pop-up or something like that. Now, a lot of conventional wisdom says that you don't necessarily want to start new things or sign contracts or do things that offer a sense of permanence or, during a Mercury retrograde time. But I think that maybe you can buck that conventional wisdom a little bit as long as your foundations are sturdy. And I think That's what the Ace of Earth represents. A good time to shore up your foundation, a good time to make sure things are balanced, and to maybe even come up with a contingency plan for if things fall out of balance. A time to be more careful, a time to make sure that you're off to a good start if you want to start something new, or if you're already in the midst of something that you've got going and that you're growing. Now's a good time to make sure things are in a good place. And so, yeah, I think this is a reassurance that, again, even though conventional wisdom says to maybe not start things during this time, that maybe you can as long as you proceed with caution and are aware of what some of the challenges of this period might be. So that's a really encouraging card for me, particularly. Let me know if that resonates with you in the comments section. And finally, our action step card, Three of Earth. I think it's very fascinating that these are all of the suit of Earth / Pentacles. This suit of physicality, the suit of resources, money, the physical world, and an action step for Three of Earth, to me, seems like an invitation toward collaboration. Maybe now is not necessarily the time to try and be a lone wolf. Maybe now is the time to, be mindful of how you might collaborate with others, getting help when you need to. Take this opportunity to continue to build and to grow, but be open to collaboration. And I think that will also really call upon what this jumper has to say, generosity of air, a generous mindset, an understanding of what some of the challenges of a Mercury retrograde can be, and being aware of them as you proceed in collaborating with others. So yeah, I think the Three of Earth or Three of Pentacles in Standard Tarot, I think this is a very good opportunity to collaborate and to not be afraid of collaboration. Let's see, I want to take a look at this card here. We have your standard ring around the rosy. So this card evokes just a sense of joy. You're getting back to earth. You are outdoors. You're in the grass. You're in nature. You're collaborating, having a great time, just allowing yourself to be in the moment, allowing yourself to be in your body, to physically exert yourself in ways that are meaningful but also enjoyable. So I think that's what this card represents. Don't feel like you have to go things alone. Don't, you know, don't allow any fear to creep in. I can be a little bit of a nervous Nelly, and this is an opportunity to remember that you don't have to go things alone. Look for opportunities to collaborate or be in community or be in fellowship with other people, and find fun ways to do that. A good way to collaborate with others is to find things that you are, find people who are like-minded in things that you enjoy. This might be a good time to work with others over a similar hobby. Find people who are interested in the things that you're interested in, and just kind of enjoy the opportunity to collaborate with others. So I think this is a really great card to pull as an action step card. And yeah, this was a relatively short reading, but one thing I do like to do to close out is I like to pull a bottom of the deck card. And for me, bottom of the deck card tends to be maybe a throughput energy, a throughput insight that maybe ties things together in the reading, or just offers yet another perspective. So we've got the deck here, and let's see what we have at the bottom. Let's flip her over. Oh, is very, very, I think it's very, very significant that most of the cards in this reading are Earth / Pentacle cards. We have the Ten of Earth, Ten of Pentacles, which is a card of fulfillment. It's a card of legacy. I think a card of just sort of let's see, what's a good way to describe it? Definitely a card of fulfillment, a card of abundance. Um, it's an opportunity to, or actually, it shows that this particular energy, maybe this particular period, will still be a good opportunity to build toward the future. There'll probably be setbacks, but just because there are possible setbacks that can come, you can still thrive, you can still flourish during these times if you lean into making sure things are balanced, that you're off to a good start, that your foundations are strong, and that you are collaborating well with like-minded individuals, and maintaining a generous mindset, a mindset that is open to communication, mindful of how you communicate, and communicating strategically, carefully, and in a way that's resourceful, and not allowing yourself to be bogged down by any misinformation, um, being willing to cut through any misinformation that might be represented here by, the moon. And I think if we can tie all those pieces together, you might be able to use this period to build something that's got legs, something that can last into the future and bring you a lot of joy, a lot of abundance, put you in company and continued collaboration with people that you care about. And I think now the cards are kind of showing me that now is still a good time to move forward with, with certain ideas, with things that, things that I might be passionate about. So yeah, I thought this was a really insightful reading, and I hope you felt the same way. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I guess as I grow as a tarot reader, start doing things like um, offering readings. You might do that online for this particular community. I've got a Substack that, I tend to expound on the readings that I'm doing in real time on YouTube. I have like maybe a more detailed write up, and that's over on my Substack. And I'll include a link to that in the description. And I thank you so much for spending time with me, and I hope this message resonated with you. If so, please don't hesitate to comment and let me know what you think. If you saw another interpretation in any of these cards, please let me know in the comments. I love to hear them. And if this is your sort of cup of tea, if tarot, divination, any of this is something that you're interested in, please consider subscribing, consider dropping a like. And until next time, this is Karmic Fixer Tarot with Janai. I'll talk to you again soon. Hey, it's me. I actually reflected on this card, and at the end of this reading, it occurred to me, and I'm still new to this deck, that the generosity is not the page, but it's actually the queen. So this is a court card of the Queen of Swords, not the Page of Swords. The page actually in this deck is curiosity. So so yeah, curiosity at this point is actually a really good thing to have, but generosity, um, I hope that came through in my interpretation of this card. But if we think more on it, the Queen of Swords is someone who has full command of their logic, their logical faculties. They are good at discerning the information that's coming across their eyes. They can they can cut away the noise. They know how to cut um, the falsehood from what's the truth. They're good at discerning information. They're probably this card I think represents media literacy. Represents being knowledgeable about what's true, speaking from a knowledgeable perspective, being receptive to the truth and knowing how to internalize that and, develop a mastery of information and communication. And this is a really good card to have during a Mercury retrograde. representative of using this time to master the way you communicate, master how you speak, master how you share information, master how you maybe send an email, maybe run a proofread, um, run a spell check or do a proofread before you hit send or before you hit publish on anything. And yeah, when I go back into editing, I will either add this particular part in or tack it in on the end. Um, Again, I guess this is, you know, par for the course. We're not in retrograde just yet, but I guess as I'm new to this deck, I kind of wanted to I wanted to see how much of this I could do without referring to my guidebook. But looking back at it, I was reminded that generosity represents the queen, and we have, that makes perfect sense. Young queen with her crown and her shears, and the familiar fox next to her. So yeah, my apologies for misspeaking on this particular card. But yeah, she's the generosity of air or the queen. And I think this energy is very important during this time. So something to be mindful of. Generosity of air, generosity of thought, mastery of thought and communication. And that's a great energy to have going into this Mercury retrograde season. So yeah, if you stayed to the end, thank you so much for watching. And until next time.